The 11th Amendment exists because the states had lost their patience. Fast. In 1793, a South Carolina citizen named Alexander Chisholm tried to sue the state of Georgia in federal court over a debt from the Revolutionary War. The Supreme Court actually said, yeah, this is allowed. Georgia immediately freaked out. Their legislator passed a resolution threatening to hang anyone who tried to enforce the judgment. Other states were like, hold up, you mean anyone from any other state can sue us in federal court and demand cash? Not happening. So just 5 years after the Bill of Rights, the states flexed their political muscle and pushed through the 11th Amendment. In short, no out-of-staters suing states in federal court unless we explicitly agree to it. It was the First Amendment in American history designed to slam the brakes on the Supreme Court. Welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band,
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not
one small step for man. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by the citizen of another state or by the citizens subject of any foreign state. Now, this one, it gets me because I still don't really understand it, but I'm going to try and share it with you, right? This is one of the things that I need to study, right? This is where I need to get out here and do my own studying and understand it a little bit better. So I'm just going to share some bare bones things with you, a little bit of the history between Chisholm and Georgia in 1793, okay? This sounds dry, but it basically says if you're from another state and you think Virginia owes you money, you can't just drag them into a federal courtroom. Or if you're British or French, merchant trying to collect debts from the Revolution, same deal. You can't sue a state in federal court. If the state doesn't want to play ball, you're out of luck. The core principle, the states have sovereign immunity. The idea that governments can't be sued without their consent. Don't understand it, but okay. Just need to do my own study of this law, right? That's where that term jurisprudence comes in, right? Study the law, right? This is an amendment I'm not very familiar with, and that's my fault. That's why I need to educate myself, but I'm going to try and educate both of us as we go through this. The spark, Chisholm versus Georgia, 1793. This whole amendment comes down to one case. Alexander Chisholm, executor of a South Carolina merchant's estate, tried to collect payment from Georgia for Revolutionary War supplies. Georgia ignored the lawsuit, saying, we're a sovereign state, you can't sue us. The Supreme Court disagreed in a 4-1 decision. They said states had surrendered some of their sovereignty when they ratified the Constitution, and that federal courts could hear cases where citizens of one state sued another. To lawyers, this sounded like logical reasoning. To the states, it sounded like open season for their treasuries. Remember, most states were still broke in the 1790s. War debts, paper money, unpaid veterans, foreign creditors, right? Lawsuits. These were like sharks smelling blood in the water. Georgia's reaction was extreme, right? They threatened death to anyone who tried to enforce the court's ruling. And the rest of the states said, you know what? You're kind of right. And that's when the states fought back. The reaction was swift and bipartisan. Both Federalists and Anti-Federalists agreed. The court had gone too far. Congress then passed the 11th Amendment in 1794, and the states ratified it by 1795. And that's lightning speed for a constitutional amendment, right? We talked about the amendment process before. Pew! That's what it sounded like when they were doing it, right? Free sound effect. Pew! Right? This was a direct check on the judiciary. Man, I'm having a hard time speaking. Think about that. This was the very first time the amendment process had been used after the Bill of Rights. And it wasn't to expand liberty or tweak government structure. It was to pull the Supreme Court back in line. I think we could probably use some of an amendment today to pull back some of these federal judges that are clearly stepping over their constitutional line. Or the Declaration of Independence. Look at my arms, man. They just like, I use a fisheye lens so you guys can get all of this awesome studios, right? Like space, because you guys care about what's behind me, right? The states were saying to the federal courts, you're powerful, but not that powerful. And what that meant for state sovereignty, the 11th Amendment locked in the idea that the states weren't just provinces under federal control. They had protections against being treated like defendants at will, right? Like you can't sue a state in federal court without permission. That's why even today, lawsuits against states are tricky. And we saw a little bit of this from some of these COVID-19 things and all this stuff in the last few years. I mean, we've really seen some of this go in action, right? If you want to sue your state government, usually you have to go through that state's own courts. Even then, states can control how much they allow. And the concept of sovereign immunity is still alive and well today. And I'm okay with this, right? But there are loopholes and there's limits. Of course, like most constitutional rules, lawyers and judges have tested these boundaries. States can still be sued by the federal government itself, right? And that's where you see these court cases that came up in the last few years, right? These were federal individuals trying to sue states. Some of them weren't federal individuals trying to sue states. Because Uncle Sam, he don't need your permission, right? Local governments don't get 11th Amendment immunity. You can sue a city or a county you can sue a city or a county in federal court, no problem. Congress can sometimes override the immunity. For example, using the 14th Amendment, Congress passed civil rights laws that allowed people to sue states for discrimination. Some say the 11th Amendment isn't absolute, but it sets a baseline. States aren't open season for all lawsuits, right? So here's the bigger picture, right? It's a balance of power. The 11th Amendment really shows us how fragile the balance of power was in the early republic. The Constitution had only been in effect for a few years, and already the states were testing how much independence they still had. The federal judiciary wanted to assert authority, and the states wanted to guard their sovereignty. The people in Congress acted as referees and sided with the states, which I love, right? Uncle Sam, I like you, but sometimes y'all got pissed off, all right? The tug of war would play out over and over and over in American history from the Civil War to Civil Rights era, but the 11th Amendment set the precedence. The states weren't going to roll over every time the federal courts flexed, and that's okay with me, right? But other times, it's not okay. The federal courts, they got to say in certain things. Again, we talked about abortion. Sorry, states, you shouldn't have any say in that. The 11th Amendment doesn't have the same flash as the first or the second, but don't underestimate it. It was born out of fear that the states would get buried under lawsuits, and it showed how fast Americans could mobilize when the courts pushed too far, right? Within 2 years, they rewrote the Constitution to slap the judiciary on the wrists and draw a line around state sovereignty. I think that's amazing. That's why that amendment process exists, and that's incredible. Anyway, I appreciate y'all listening today. And remember, history isn't boring, especially when one cranky lawsuit against Georgia triggered the fastest constitutional smackdown in American history. See you next time.